Okay, now we're official. I'm on screen. I made that magic happen. Welcome, everybody. I am Michelle Deutschman, the Executive Director of the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. I'm really excited to kick off our annual Fellows in the Field interactive workshop series, just in time for back to school. I think if you are UC Merced or UC Berkeley, go Bears. I think today or this week is your back to school week. So if you're new to the center, welcome. If you're a regular, we're happy to have your continued participation and support. Fellows in the Field workshops are for people just like you, people who are in the field and want to learn how to apply our fellows' incredible workshop to their day-to-day work. As many of you know, the center has a fellows program that brings together faculty and practitioners and administrators who are selected through a competitive process. Fellows are awarded $20,000 in money for research in order to complete a project during their year-long fellowship. If you have not had a chance to see all of the terrific research of our fellows, we will drop that link in. This academic year is sort of a double whammy of sorts, right? Many of us are anticipating a continuation of protests and encampments, as well as increased civic activity and engagement as we get closer to the November presidential election. Many of you have reached out to the center to inquire about innovative ideas and approaches for before and after November 5th. Today's speaker, Alex Kappus, is the perfect person to address these issues since he has spent the last year studying the effect of a piece of California legislation, the California Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act, also known as AB 963. AB 963 requires that California's 116 community colleges and 23 California state universities. It also requests strongly that the 10 UCs, all of those enact provisions, including the appointment of what we're going to call a Civic, a Civic and Voter Empowerment Coordinator, to lead campus-wide nonpartisan civic and voter education efforts and communication. During Alex's research, he interviewed 23 Civics and conducted 4 focus groups in order to examine the lived experience of leading this work across the 3 different California systems. And through this, he uncovered challenges and promising practices for fostering a healthy campus civic culture, which I know is what all of us want. A little bit about Alex. He has over 15 years of leadership experience in higher ed, serving in a variety of institutional contexts in 4 different states and in several student development functional areas, including Res Life, new student and family programs, financial aid, leadership development, and student success. He's a jack of all trades. He currently serves as an account executive for student success with Credo Higher Education Consulting, where he champions student success through the firm's signature student retention initiative, Moving the Needle. In his previous role as Senior Director for Student Success at North Carolina State, he served on the university's Pack the Polls Coalition, where he and his colleagues proposed, designed, and launched the 2022 Civic Education Challenge, a campus-wide effort to advance civic engagement. Alex received his PhD in higher adult and lifelong education from Michigan State, a master's in education and college student affairs administration from University of Georgia, and a BA in poli-sci from Emory University. Before I turn it over to Alex, I want to remind participants that you can share your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. And if you want to enable captioning, click the button at the bottom of your screen that says Turn on Captions. Okay, and now to Alex. I want to start by asking Alex, how does someone who got their education in Georgia and Emory and in Michigan end up spending a year researching a piece of California legislation?
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you everybody for tuning in today for this session. Great question. I, as you noted, have worked in and learned in higher education for over 15 years. And over about several years into my career, I realized that we're really good about talking about the civic purpose of higher education, but civic often stops at community service and volunteering and service learning. And these are worthy activities, don't get me wrong, but far too often, college students are graduating with little understanding of how their government works, how to participate, and often feel disillusioned by our toxic political climate. In fact, young people aged 18 through 29 vote at a rate lower than any other age cohort. And this extends beyond voting into helping students understand other ways to access civic life in their communities, understanding their rights, their responsibilities, and how that intersects with their chosen career path. So I, like you, audience, are concerned about the health of our democracy. And I believe that higher education needs to play a more prominent role in cultivating a better future. I learned about the fellowship through my colleague, Dr. Crispin Barr, who sent me the call for proposals. And I saw it as an opportunity to really use my research skills to continue to understand how we can better support college students in this civic life. And so in my doctoral program, I studied politically engaged college students working as democracy fellows through the Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project. And a central finding from that work is that students who are doing this work, working as peer educators, feel very little support from their own colleges and universities to do that work. And so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to look at the legislation, California Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act. And I realized that there was little to no scholarly work that had been done on this landmark legislation. So the rest is history. I'm very thankful that the center selected my project and had the opportunity to offer this contribution to the field.
Well, we're a mutual admiration society. We are so thrilled to have you as part of the center family. All right, so to kick it off, let's show everyone some of the results about how people feel about higher education and our support of democracy. And you know what, Alex, I'm gonna let you take it from here, and I'll come back when it's time to do some Q&A.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. So thanks for taking this little poll. And I might add that the audience today ranges from college presidents to election administrators to college professors, and of course, my dear family members who are tuned in as well. So thank you for making the time to be here. I've asked these questions of a number of audiences across the country, and the overwhelming sentiment. So today, a vast majority of you are either moderately or very concerned about the health of our democracy. And the vast majority of you also believe that higher education must play a role in making our democracy a healthier one. So I start with that premise because I think it's really important to note that there's a desire from folks inside and outside of higher education to play a more prominent role in cultivating a healthier democracy. So I'll jump right here in today to my session, and there'll be opportunities to pause and ask some questions in the chat and using the Q&A feature. If you're not familiar with the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement, I highly encourage you to join their mailing list, listen to the Speech Matters podcast, and engage with their programming throughout the year. My fellow cohort mates will also be having Fellows in the Field sessions, so I highly encourage you to go to theirs as well. And for those of you with great ideas on research that advances free speech and civic engagement, I hope you'll consider putting in a proposal for a future fellowship. My project never would have happened without this fellowship. As a full-time employee and not having this as a focus in my day-to-day as a faculty member or a researcher, I wouldn't have had the structure and the support to be able to carry out this project. Next to my doctoral program, it's been the most meaningful professional endeavor of my career. I was able to join with a cohort of scholar leaders, all advancing free speech and civic engagement across a variety of fields, and talk about a year to be examining free speech and civic engagement in higher education. So eternally grateful. Our peer input and review process really encouraged me to expand the reach of my own project and sharpened my thinking on these critical issues. And again, want to thank the center for their generous support, my cohort for their input and guidance. Special thanks to Michelle, our senior fellow, Dr. Nina Flores, my faculty sponsor, Dr. Jeffrey Kopstein, and I also want to acknowledge the California Secretary of State Students Vote Project team, Janelle, Wendy, and Kevin, who generously gave of their time to provide feedback and to be in conversation with me this past year. And of course, last but not least, to the participants of this study, faculty and staff who are leading this work. all across the state of California. So today's session, I'm going to provide some initial framing, dive into promising practices, as well as challenges to advancing this work, and close with some recommendations. My hope is to share insights that are practical and that you can take with you and lead from your own seat. My call to action today: I'm guilty of attending webinars, tuning in, leaving with some new insights and ideas, but not taking action. So my challenge to everybody who's attending today or watching the recording, whether you're a faculty member, a college administrator, an election official, or even one of my family or friends, write down at least one takeaway, an idea, a concept, a program, a resource, something that you are going to commit to taking action on to learn more about, or something that you want to do something about after today. And if you're willing, at the end of the session today, I'll actually invite you to share what those action items are. So let's talk about the state of student civic and political engagement across the country. Research shows that students hold low levels of political trust and often leave college disillusioned by politics altogether. They and we are navigating a period of extreme negative partisanship and hyperpolarization, made worse by rampant misinformation, purposeful disinformation, all amplified by social media. Young voters, as I noted earlier, 18 to 29 years old, consistently vote at the lowest rate of any age group. National youth voter turnout in 2022 was just 23%, and that's lower than the historic 2018 cycle of 28%, which broke records. And in 2014, just 13% of youth voted. Of course, we see turnout increase during presidential election years, but still remain lower than any other age cohort. State by state, students face different rules, and equity gaps persist among student populations and their participation in our democracy. Beyond voting, the discourse continues to unravel with clashes on campuses and in our communities, with institutions unprepared for this and reacting in the moment. The discrepancy of students' civic engagement is often portrayed as apathy, and the research would show clearly this is better explained by the barriers that young people face, including the lack of institutionally supported efforts to provide an educational environment that fosters their understanding of democracy. It's well known across the country and across the world that democracy is in question and in peril in some places. A rise in authoritarian leadership, continued questioning and distrust in the legitimacy of democratic process. If we were to pull up the college and university mission statements of everybody here today, it would be safe to say that there's an inherent thread, a civic mission across higher education. But what exactly are we doing about? In our poll today, many of you, believe that colleges and universities need to play a more prominent role. So what exactly are we talking about? I think it's important to situate terminology. Civic engagement can be understood as this larger umbrella term. All the values and all the activities that really constitute being involved in the life of your community, for the betterment of your community. Within that, there are democratic values. And within that, there's political engagement. And today, I'd like us to think specifically about nonpartisan political engagement, helping students to learn about how their government works and to have opportunities to participate, actively engaged in learning that helps them decide for themselves about issues and candidates, activities ranging from educating peers on the voting process, conducting voter registration drives, coordinating nonpartisan debate watch parties, organizing local candidate forums, offering access to nonpartisan education on issues and candidates, encouraging purposeful dialogue across differences. So I'm calling for civic learning reconsidered. We need to consider more carefully. The research demonstrates the impact of civic and community engagement activities on all facets of student life, from retention and completion to career and personal discernment, values exploration, even mental health and equity issues can be fostered through civic and community engagement activities. And cultivating a healthier campus culture, one where students are actively learning from one another across differences, learning to be more socially responsible in their contributions to our communities. The Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act, AB 963, as Michelle shared in her introduction, was introduced and passed in 2019, and it requires all 116 community colleges and the 23 California State University campuses, and encourages the 10 UCs to adhere to certain provisions, appointing a civic and voter empowerment coordinator, submitting an action plan, communicating important dates and processes to students. And you can visit the language of that legislation if you're curious. The first of its kind, this law, I wanted to shine a spotlight on it. What can we learn from it? What can we understand about the implementation of it? And who better to learn about the implementation of the law than from the people carrying out the work across all three systems of post-secondary education? I wanted to get at an understanding of their lived experience, including the challenges, including promising practices, ways that they may be able to share that good work happening on their campuses with all of you, whether you're in the state of California or not. I approached the study as a qualitative, constructivist, inviting my participants to be co-collaborators with me. I used semi-structured interviews and focus groups, and believing in the importance of stories. You'll see, if you get a chance to read the manuscript, examples of stories that really bring to life the essence of this work. I developed a purposeful sample of institutions from all three systems, accounting for geographic diversity, institutional size, the relationship to the law, marked by whether or not they were in full compliance with it or not. So having a mix of those who are going above and beyond and those who didn't quite meet the requirements yet of the law. So I want to give you a snapshot of the overview of the findings, just to start to paint a picture of what it's like leading this work and implementing this law on campuses across California. There was far more in common across all three systems than I ever could have anticipated. Of course, leading on a campus of 50,000 students at an R1, UC is different than living out the mission on a community college campus. However, the experiences of this role, being a coordinator for civic and voter empowerment, was scary close in terms of the ways that they could celebrate and commiserate around the common challenges and around the opportunities for being able to really help students. So, of course, the uniqueness of each campus culture had a role to play, whether the institution was a Hispanic serving institution, the politics of the community, the history of the campus, all of these things had an impact on the coordinator's experience, but certainly far more in common than I would have anticipated, including these 6 themes, which really provide a portrait of what the experience was like leading and is like leading in these roles. First and foremost was the experience of being selected to be your campus's civic. So some were already involved in civic and voter empowerment work on their campus on a volunteer basis. But the vast majority were voluntold for this. They were working in other areas, whether that be student life or working in government affairs, and was tapped on the shoulder and asked, can you take this on? Hey, this law passed, can you take this on? One person actually learned that they were their campus's coordinator because of my invitation to interview about their role. So as you can see, the implementation of the law has not been quite as consistent across the board. There was little recognition of the additional duties that folks took on, the time, the energy, the effort. Of the 23, only 2 of the coordinators received any kind of acknowledgement in the form of compensation or in the one case, a course release, being a faculty member. And sadly, most of the civics felt completely unprepared for the role. A few had a background, whether that be personally involved in similar activities or in their former career and work. The second theme I want to highlight here is feeling that they were compliant but constrained. So the majority of the campuses really struggled with bandwidth to go beyond what the law requires. So some explicitly were told, don't do anything else. Do what this law requires and nothing more. And this led to frustration among the coordinators, describing the work in terms of checking boxes versus doing the necessary campus-wide work needed to make a difference and to make the difference that they wanted to make on their campuses. But of course, if this is added bullet points to your job description in a big job description, it might fall, of course, in terms of priorities. I will say, despite the challenges, the coordinators really represent true civic champions. Centering this idea of nonpartisanship is key, of course, to compliance with the law, but also their wholehearted belief in that being the right thing to do, the way to carry out this work, the way to support students across the political spectrum in accessing their democracy and engaging in meaningful learning activities around civic engagement. They were advocates. They helped students who encountered barriers, whether that was on election day itself or accessing mail voting for out-of-state students. Countless examples of advocacy. And they cared deeply about students on the margins, including students who don't have access to the ballot, whether that be undocumented students, formerly incarcerated students, underage students, international students. They wanted to make sure that their efforts were inclusive of all students on campus, that all students had an opportunity to learn and engage in different ways. This idea of being a lone wolf really came about through conversations with the coordinators who often felt alone in this work. And as a result, they were highly reliant on student leaders to actually carry out the work. And so on one hand, that's a great thing because they were tapping into student leadership to be able to support the activities, the events, the voter engagement work that they were doing, but overly reliant, I would say, and most of the time didn't compensate students for that work. Collaborative catalysts. So given that limited bandwidth, they really embraced the importance of collaboration. You name it, they partnered with the department, and yes, even beyond the political science department. Folks found it particularly helpful to reach out to their librarians. Shout out to my librarians on the call, the athletics department, anyone who is interested and willing to be collaborative in nature on these events and programs and learning opportunities. They created some amazing partnerships. And the last theme here was just living through the moment. So the interviews came just as the unrest was unfolding on campuses across the country, especially in the spring semester. And so the protests, along with concerns about the upcoming election, had everybody embracing for the fall and trying to do what they could to prepare, because preparation at this point feels like it's too late, right? So they really wanted to do what they could in the spring semester to get ready for a busy election season. This quote here at the bottom of the screen from Brooke really goes back to the lone wolf sentiment, the feeling that the institution simply is not prioritizing this work as a central part of their mission. And by the way, these are pseudonyms all throughout, so I'm not using folks' real names, and of course, aliases for the institutions as well. Challenges, so many challenges associated with this role, of course, grounded in the fact that this was an unfunded state mandate, meaning no funding was associated with the passage of this law, requiring colleges and universities and requesting the UCs to be and to fulfill the obligations of the law. They felt isolated as a result, being that lone wolf dynamic, and having many other job duties, didn't often have the bandwidth to take on additional work. And then resources. Without resources to carry out programming meant that they had to find money on campus, even going to student government to ask for funding. And that was often a common theme from the coordinators, was going to students to ask them for their student fee money to spend on educational efforts to help them be engaged in their democracy. Low campus buy-in. So navigating bureaucracy, encountering this disconnect between the espoused values of civic engagement and the enacted mission, and even facing active resistance from colleagues to this work, and unnecessary rules and things that get in the way of the work being able to be accomplished. Really appreciate this quote here from Matthew, where he said, it's our jobs. It's not just on the students. And he was really working hard to change that narrative. And then addressing barriers. First and foremost, of course, educating students, helping make civic and voter engagement tangible, relevant, and accessible, and really reaching out, especially to students who feel excluded from our democracy itself. Learning that many students growing up were told that democracy doesn't work for them. So why even bother? That their voice doesn't matter in our political process. So the bill is called the Student Civic and Voter Empowerment, and much of the work and many of the efforts focus solely on voting. And again, this work goes beyond voting. Not all students have the right to vote. So a challenge was developing civic education efforts that were inclusive across the campuses and go beyond voting. And serving as a resource. The example here of a coordinator, Shruti, on election day, who heard from students that they were being turned away from a poll and that they were closing the line early. And she was able to help advocate to ensure that those students could vote that day. Tracking outcomes, the coordinators were challenged by really the ability to measure the impact that they were having. So these were some of the core challenges that the coordinators faced in their work. But their promising practices far outweighed those challenges. And so the net positive of this law is that all across all three systems of post-secondary education in California, there are faculty and staff who are in the trenches doing really important work to educate and connect students to their democracy. We co-created a list of promising practices that you can access through my project, and especially relevant for people who are directly responsible for this work on a campus-wide level. I want to highlight just a few for sake of time. One is this concept, I keep referencing this, go beyond voting. What does that actually look like? Some campuses were providing students with knowledge of other civic actions that they could take beyond voting, writing politicians, attending town halls, volunteering as poll workers, serving on statewide task forces. Another example, partnering with faculty and departments to provide opportunities for students to get into the field and study civic issues. Curriculum development, encouraging academic governance to review academic plans and ensure that students have the opportunity to take courses about American government and how to take a more active role in it. Lots of efforts around dialogue, opportunities for students to engage in structured dialogue across differences. The First Amendment, educating students on free speech, academic freedom, inclusion, helping students understand their rights and their responsibilities as well. And media literacy, an increasingly complex digital information ecosystem. Colleges and universities need to be helping students understand the dangers of misinformation and purposeful disinformation. Next, embedding this work into the student experience, right? It's not enough for the students to complete an online module and check the box, right? How are we really embedding this as a core part of the student experience in the curriculum and the co-curriculum so that when they come in there on move-in day through orientation and at different benchmarks throughout their experience, that civic and political engagement opportunities for learning are present and how they get connected. Get local. The civics I talked with were deeply committed to building partnerships in their local communities, facilitating lots of learning experiences for students. Some creative examples included advocacy days, relationships with government officials where student leaders would go and meet with them about issues that matter. Candidate forums, inviting candidates to campus to speak with students. Careers in government and politics, especially in off-election years, inviting politicians and government officials to come talk about their paths to civil service. One of my favorite examples was one campus had invited alumni involved in civic life to participate in campus events and a panel. And one campus actually had a panel of judges, all former students, to talk about careers in the legal system. And how are we introducing students to who their local officials are? Many students are attending college and university in places where they don't live or they didn't grow up. And so how are we helping them learn about their communities and who represents them? And unlikely partners, looking near and far on and off campus to be able to encourage partnerships that help encourage students to really be connected to their democracy. So I want to pause there before I get to recommendations and find out, based on what you have learned so far about the California Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act, as well as the experiences of coordinators leading this work, what questions has it prompted for you? What are you interested in hearing about as we move forward today?
So I'm taking a peek at the Q&A, and right now people just want to know how they can get your slides because they really want to consume that information, but nothing else yet. So I would say I bet people are pretty excited and eager to hear the recommendations. Let's move on to those and just encourage people to include additional questions. And I would even say, if it's okay with you, Alex, if you have something that's worked well for you, you should share it so that this can be an opportunity for reciprocal kind of and exchange of ideas. So let's go to, well, hold on, let me just check one more thing. Yeah, let's go on, and then I see Jack's question and we can come back to that after we do recommendations, okay?
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. Um, Absolutely. Want to make sure, as you all are processing what you're learning today and hearing about, that you have time to ask questions here, and we'll save about 10 minutes toward the end. So I want to remind you, what are your takeaways from this? Was it mentioned about the First Amendment and how students are actually learning about that or not on your campus? What is it? What will your takeaway be from this session, and what are you going to take action on? I invite you to actually go ahead and tell me what your takeaway is. It's really interesting. I've been doing this all across the country through presentations, and really nice to see the variation of what folks' major takeaways are. So I went ahead and put the link to that form in the chat. So I also want to make sure I know that the link is in the chat for the report. Want to point to a couple things. So first is the full manuscript is toward the bottom of the screen, but I've also developed in partnership with the Civics resources for you, promising practices, a resource guide, as well as recommendations for different audiences. So definitely make sure you check those out. And I want to take some time to really talk about those resources and specifically the recommendations. So first and foremost, in the last decade, there has been an influx of interest, resources, and organizations wanting to help colleges and universities to center civic and democratic engagement. And it can be overwhelming to know how to navigate all of those resources, all of those organizations. And so what I would recommend is, first, before going outside of the boundaries of your institution, is to really truly examine the inner strengths and capacities of your institution, right? Maybe you have a center on campus, or maybe you have a particular faculty member who does research that would be really, really great to be able to amplify across the campus, right? What are those internal strengths and capacities for civic and voter empowerment on your campus? And then start to look at the resources, right? I believe it's important to know what your expectations are through the government. The U.S. Department of Education in 2024 produced a toolkit for promotion of voter participation and guidance for institutions on what's allowable and what's not according to the law. And that extends beyond the U.S. Department of Education, but your state's Secretary of State office. Prioritize building a relationship with them, understanding what resources they have available, and of course, your local election officials. Those are the first two places internally, and then start to explore the government resources related to supporting your students' connection to our democracy. I also then would start to look at what tools exist from third-party organizations, right? What are ways that you might be able to help build an action plan, for example, or be able to examine your protocols around free speech on your campus, right? And then I would start to look finally, at more formal partnerships with trusted third-party organizations to leverage their support, their expertise, and sometimes their funding, right? And so we'll go ahead and put this link here in the chat. This is a resource guide. And how I built this was actually from organizations that many of the civics were working with. And so just expanded upon that and tried to create a comprehensive resource there, a resource on resources, if you will. All right, so on to the recommendations. Now, if you are leading this work for your campus, or if you are on a coalition leading this work, I think it's really important to learn from this study. There are so many great findings that the coordinators across the state of California have learned in trying to advance this work. And so I want to highlight just a few because, again, sake of time, we only have an hour today. The first is this institutional audit, really understanding what exists, what is happening on your campus. I heard time after time of competing programming and competing efforts, dialogue groups happening in one department, one academic department, and not knowing that there was a dialogue initiative in the student affairs division, right? So how are we truly centering this work on campus? And that's where a coalition can come in handy, because the coalition will continue to snowball and help build bridges across the campus. The civics in this study thought it was absolutely instrumental to have somebody on the president's cabinet who understands the work that is being done, to know that there is a law that exists that the institution is being held accountable to. But many of you work in states that don't have a law that encourages civic and voter engagement. Regardless of whether you do or not, you can still work to find a civic champion in the cabinet. And that's important for a number of reasons. Of course, to continue to make this a priority for the leadership of the campus, but also from a resources standpoint. And connected to that first point, how are we building bridges across divisions and departments at these institutions? And then last one I want to highlight here is finding community. I noted through this research that coordinators leading this work often feel alone on their campuses. So finding ways to build community off your campus with other coordinators across the state or across the country, tapping into opportunities. And of course, there are limitations to that. You might not be able to afford to go to a conference, but there, thankfully, are many things that are happening virtually and ways to be connected and engaged. Even just hosting my focus groups for this study, the folks just wanted to connect with each other and they wanted to learn from each other. What's working on my campus? What's working on your campus? And how can we learn from each other? The next audience that I want to speak to are presidents and their senior leaders on the campuses themselves. Some of you on this call, I'm talking to you. My first recommendation based on this research is the power of appointing somebody on your campus who is responsible for a collaborative effort that advances strategic goals around civic and voter engagement. This is critical. We at universities often say things are important, and until somebody has it in their title and job description, it really doesn't become a priority. So it's really important that somebody be given that charge, but not just the charge, the support, the ear, the resources, and the time. And related to that point, a champion at the cabinet level who's paying attention to what's happening, who understands the importance of this work and wants to see it happening beyond election years, right? This has to be beyond election years. And that's my last point, right? This has to be something that colleges and universities prioritize, not just during presidential election years when everyone's talking about it and thinking about it. But if you really want to cultivate a culture of civic and voter engagement on your campus, it cannot happen in the fall, only in the fall of election years. The next audience I want to invite, and I know I have some of my colleagues at the California Secretary of State office on the call. Thank you so much again for your support. The Secretary of State offices, election officials across the country would be wise to follow California's lead. Truly, I think they have created and continue to innovate on a model of scaling this work across the state of California. Um, Hosting regular office hours on and having that publicly available on your website is a way that colleges and universities can problem solve and help their students ultimately. Student advisory committees, having an opportunity for students to give voice to the things that they're encountering in your state, be it barriers for registration or actually carrying out the right to vote. And templates, timelines, toolkits, anything that you can develop that helps make it clear to students and, of course, your population across the state. I think, again, California is leading the way in this, being able to create resources that really help, particularly the student audience. Highlighting their website here because I want you to go visit it, whether you live in the state of California or not. It's just an incredible team that is committed to this work. It's a small team, a mighty team of 3 folks dedicated to this work. And the Secretary of State herself, Dr. Shirley Weber, is a true champion for civic and voter engagement across the state of California. And so I think a lot of lessons can be learned from other Secretary of State offices by taking a look at not just this legislation, but how it's been implemented and how this team continues to innovate around the implementation and the support for colleges and universities across the state. And my last audience, those of you on the call who are involved in policymaking, I encourage you, of course, to relate it to my last point, invest in resources at your Secretary of State that support students. And this is one key way if we can strengthen the relationship between Secretary of State offices and colleges and universities, it would do well for students. Avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. If you're considering legislation that may require institutions or mandate certain things, the benefit of the way the language of AB 963, the California Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act, was written is that, yes, there are certain requirements, but there is a bit of flexibility in how things are implemented, which is really, really helpful. And the last one here is an advisory board. Again, getting input from colleges and universities, and especially from students, I think is another way that Secretary of State offices can show that they're truly listening. Of course, top of mind are continued concerns about how campuses are responding to demonstrations. This quote here from Hugo was really telling. They felt like their university was just so concerned about the protests that they were investing lots and lots of money. Yes, important to prioritize the safety of students. He's not at all advocating for that. Neither would I. Safety's paramount. But can we invest other resources, additional resources, into helping foster the other things that would help actually alleviate some of the pressures around students and the conflicts on campus? And these are 3 questions I would encourage you to ask, especially if you are on a college campus. Where are students actually learning about the First Amendment and free expression at your institution? How can civic learning be embedded throughout the experience? And what did you learn from this spring? Whether you had demonstrations on your campus or not, there's a lot to be learned. And a good tabletop exercise as the new year gets started would be a great thing for especially our student affairs folks on the call. And I just, again, go back to the resource guide that I prepared with lots of links and tools, including through the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. I also want to point out that my employer, Credo, and the Constructive Dialogue Institute have partnered on an institute for presidents and their cabinets to really examine free speech and inclusion on their campuses. So definitely visit those resources. I want to close today by telling the story behind AB 963 to the best of my ability, as it is secondhand. But The idea for the legislation actually originated from college students. These were students who were serving on the advisory committee of a California-based nonprofit, a band of voters. And students hailed from the University of California, LA, Cal State, Long Beach, College of the Canyons, Fullerton College, Orange Coast Community College, Santiago Canyon College, Saddleback College, and they belong to many, many different third-party organizations, including the NAACP, YC Fresno Unit, March for Our Lives, and others. And the students who were part of this nonprofit organization, the Student Advisory Board, they felt adamantly that their colleges and universities needed to make civic and voter engagement a more prominent and more proactive priority on their campuses. So for 9 months, students lobbied, testified, offered their ideas as the legislation was drafted and progressed through the California House and Senate and ultimately signed into law on October 8th, 2019. In a conversation with the founder of a band of voters, Joyce Forsythe, she said that, the legislation really was motivated by students, and that they wanted to address the lack of education that was at the heart of low voter turnout. And of course, Joey, in my conversations with her, always centers students, but I also want to give Joey her flowers for her tireless advocacy and continued work to help students have their voices heard across the state of California and beyond. I'm going to play a short clip here, which was on signing day of that law.
We know that youth voter turnout is important. We know this matters. And we know that it is pretty dismal. In the 2014 election, only 8.2% of 18 to 24-year-olds cast a ballot. Last year, in the 2018 election, that figure climbed to 27.5%. But that's still less than 1/3 of our young adults who are voting, who are engaging in our democracy, who are making their voices heard. Less than 1/3. We must do better.
With the Civic Empowerment Act, students will be able to have a resource on campus, a voting coordinator that'll be able to teach students about how they can vote, teach them about the process of voting, teach students about where to vote, how they can get registered to vote, and who is on the ballot, what is on the ballot. It will give students the resources they need to be educated and informed citizens and informed voters.
This bill will allow students like myself access and resources to participate in our beautiful democracy, which is something we so very, very need to do.
We ask our legislators, our colleges, our universities, our representatives to understand the pivotal role that higher education plays in providing a comprehensive education and democratic engagement.
By being able to have AB 963, will give a little bit of the power back to the students to be able to make decisions that would impact them as well as their communities. By having someone specialized in the job, will give students the information that they need in order to make the best decisions possible.
We need to help ensure that we empower young people with the tools to make sure that they are changing the communities that they see.
We know from our work, having talked to thousands of young people, that they really want to vote. But what's heartbreaking is that they often feel ashamed, like somehow it's their fault they don't know how. Well, it's not their fault. It's actually our fault.
This coordinator will develop a civic and voter empowerment action plan specific to their campus. This plan will ensure that we are communicating voting dates and critical election information to students. We have 3.1 million students throughout California's 147 public universities and colleges. 3.1 million students. For these students, a comprehensive education does not end at the classroom door. It extends into the real world. We want to teach our students to be engaged citizens, to shape their own political reality, and to shape the future of the great state of California.
All right, so I will now turn it over to what questions you have, because I've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and I hope to be able to answer some questions.
Oh, that's a very inspirational way to kind of sum things up. So, Alex, one question that came from Jack Fang has to do with recommendations you might have for student organization leaders. Can we start there?
Oh, I love that question, Jack. The research I did, of course, focused on faculty and staff leading this work. And so I didn't include recommendations for student leaders, but I can offer some thoughts for sure. First, I would say find out who your civic is on campus, whether you're in the state of California or not. Is there a faculty or staff member who is leading work around civic and voter engagement on your campus? I think it's really important that you get connected to your university's administration because your advocacy can help make this a more prioritized action item, and you can get some resources to help support your work. I would also say, continue to build bridges with other student organizations. In the same sense that a lot of universities and colleges are siloed, the different departments not talking to each other, they might be running two different dialogue groups instead of working together on it. The same thing happens with student organizations, right? So making sure that you're building bridges across the different student organizations on your campus to put your power together, right? I also think finding ways to get some training around, if you want to lead, specifically get out the vote type work, go over and find resources through the Secretary of State office in your state. I think that's a really great place to start and start to build bridges there. So hope that helps.
Okay, another question came in. Is there a group or network of people doing this work at different campuses that we can join to share best practices and resources? I think the answer is there are many. Maybe you can highlight a couple that you think would be,
Yeah, I think so. I would recommend go ahead and go to that resource guide that I cultivated, and depending on what area, what you're particularly interested in advancing, there's a number of third-party organizations that do really amazing work to support folks on campuses. I would say embedded in your question also is how do you join up with other people who are doing this work? And that would be a recommendation that I have for professional associations, for system offices. I think those are places that it might be you bringing that to the table. Hey, maybe we can start an opportunity in my state for student affairs professionals to be talking about civic and voter empowerment work. And odds are there are some people in pockets doing that work, but are they talking to each other? Are they sharing best practices?
if it's okay just to jump in and add one thing, just what I can share from the UC system is that they have what they call community of practice groups across the system. So there was already one that sorry, I'm like, there's a loud noise. Already one that existed at UC for civic engagement, so that anybody whose work touches civic engagement has an opportunity to meet. And we started something similar for free speech, and we just meet every other month for an hour, and it's just a way for people to touch base and do exactly what you were saying, Alex, which is make sure that people know what's happening and that we're not reinventing the wheel. Okay, another good question, always from John Wilson, always has good questions. He's asking some conservative groups such as NAS, I don't know that abbreviation, have attacked Action Civics as a left-wing plot to activate liberal-leaning students. How would you suggest, Alex, colleges respond into these kinds of attacks that, there's really an agenda to getting students to vote?
Yeah, great question, John. And interestingly enough, there are also efforts across the country of colleges and centers that have been started across the country that some left-leaning groups are claiming are conservative attempts to forward their agenda, right? Colleges for civic learning and that kind of thing. Let's keep civics and civic learning as nonpartisan as possible. I think that's truly the way to address any of the concerns that might come up, right? There is this longstanding belief that colleges and universities are indoctrination stations, right? And the research would show contrary, right? That students, generally speaking, their beliefs and political beliefs as they come in hold pretty steady to what they were and how they identified coming in. And so, this work, I think, could completely unravel if videos or journalism comes out and things that show people who are being irresponsible in the work, right? Telling people who to vote for, how to vote. And so I think the best case scenario is build a coalition on your campus that invites in voices from across the political spectrum, and hold each other accountable on your own campus, so that when we put on an event, that there's truly a space of learning, and that we're teaching students and we're modeling for students how to learn across differences. A really, really great example of this was with my colleagues at NC State University. There was a program called Dining with Democracy that Dr. Paula McAvoy and Dr. Christy Bird innovated around, and basically broke out folks into small groups. They presented an issue, they presented both sides of the issue, and then each table would come together in dialogue and conversation about the issue. And then the entire room would actually vote on the issue itself, right? So it's so cool. There's so many innovative ways to teach students about civics and politics, to be political, but to not be partisan. And I think that's it's a challenge. There have to be standards around what constitutes nonpartisan civic and voter empowerment work. And like I said, I think the state of California is leading in this, doing it in the way that that truly is inclusive. So hope that helped, John. Great question.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we have come to almost the end of this time. Now, I could be wrong, but I anticipate that Alex is probably happy to talk further with folks or engage with you, to help with whatever is happening on your campuses. So I want to thank Alex, not only for like his work, but his contributions to the community, in addition to being an amazing scholar. He's just a great person as well. I'm sure you get that sense. And so we're so happy to be able to share your incredible work and recommendations. I am going to give a quick shout out. We have 2 more scheduled fellows in the field, which I'm just going to mention Ashley Robinson talking about free speech narratives in the work of bias reporting. I think that it's particularly, again, timely given the things that we're seeing on campus and so many people alleging that they don't feel safe because of the words that people are using. So that will be upcoming next month. And then October, we have Raquel Rawl, who is going to be talking about student trustees. And I actually think this is especially connected to Alex's work and to this broader idea of civic engagement. And what does it mean? And what does it mean for students? And what does it mean for university systems to include student trustees? So those are 2 things that are coming up. And the last is in the next week or so, the center will be sharing our updated resources in terms of all the things Alex is talking about, is kind of pulling together and elevating campus ways to make campus action plans, support voter registration, and support students, faculty, and administration. So keep your eyes out for that. And Alex, do you have a final word? I'll let you close it up.
Just gratitude to the center and to everybody who tuned in today and who watches the recording. Please read my work and the brilliance of the civics across the state of California. And please reach out if I can be helpful in advancing the work on your campus. So thanks so much, Michelle, and have a great day, everybody.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.